let's let everyone in. Welcome to this session of Mass Communication Week. It's also the Fundamentals of Digital and Online Media class time and Zoom. So my name is Jon Zmikly, and I'll be moderating the panel. I teach here in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication in the Digital Media Innovation Program. And this is the Fundamentals of Digital and Online Media class. We have some very special guests today. Maira Garcia, who's a digital news editor for culture at the New York Times, is with us. She's also a Texas State grad, both undergrad and graduate school, and former editor of the University Star. So quite a great rap sheet. And side note, Maira and I went to grad school together here up at Texas State, and it was awesome. And we went to an Offspring concert together, which was really fun too. And then we've got Virginia Alves, who is with us as well. We're so glad to have you. Virginia is also a Texas State grad, a PR grad actually, and now works as a distribution editor at Insider. And so we've got lots of cool things to talk about. We're so happy for you to join us digitally. And so I think it'd be great if, as people come in, I'd love to I did a tiny intro to y'all, but if each of you would just kind of go and talk a little bit about your time at Texas State, both grad and undergrad, and then your journey from there to where you are now, just to kind of get us caught up with where you started and where you're at now. Maira, would you mind going first?
Hey, not at all. Thank you all so much for having me. I really appreciate being a part of this and being here with you, Jon, and Virginia. Let's see. I did my BA at Texas State I got there in 2004. Graduated my BA in 2007. I had a degree in mass communication, print journalism, and political science. Decided to go to graduate school from there. My MA was focused on new media, which has served me immensely in my role now. As Jon mentioned, I was editor of the paper while I was at Texas State. A role that I was extremely proud to be a part of. It taught me so much. It was a great experience. After graduate school, I worked a few freelance gigs and for a publishing company and a startup. And then I got hired at the Austin American-Statesman, worked there for a couple of years. I started out as a night web producer, got promoted to social media editor, which I did in the last year that I was there. From there, I went to the Times in 2012. I just celebrated my 8-year anniversary, which is crazy. I say this all the time that I never imagined that I would get there. It just wasn't a thought in my mind. I never had this idea of like, oh, I'm going to go live in New York, but it happened. I'm glad it happened. It's been such a great experience. I love working for the Times. I love working with my colleagues, and it's just been, a ride. And so yeah, 8 years at the Times. I started out there as a night web producer, went to the home screen, which is homepage and mobile. From there, I jumped around to a few different sections until I landed in culture, which covers things like visual and performing arts, TV, movies, podcasts most recently. So yeah, everything that's under the pop culture umbrella we cover. I love being part of that department. It's a lot of fun and just something new every day.
That's awesome. It's so crazy to hear you say that, Maira, because and I came to teach full time at Texas State in 2012 as well. So it just time flies so fast.
Really does.
Yeah. And okay, so Virginia, tell us a little bit about your journey to Business Insider.
Yes, so I went to Texas State. I started at Texas State in 2012, actually. I did my first year at UTSA. So from 2011 to 2012, I was at UTSA, but I transferred to Texas State. And I did my bachelor in public relations with a concentration in digital media. So it was when Cindy and John were figuring out the like digital media innovation major, and I was so excited about it, but I had to graduate. Like I just didn't have, I had so many credits because I had changed my major so many times, and I really wish that I had like stayed longer and graduated with that degree, but PR was great for me, I think. So I did that first, and I didn't know that I wanted to go into journalism really when I was in college. My dad's a journalism professor at UT, so I was like not wanting to do that. But I knew that I wanted to work with social media, and so that's why I chose public relations, because I thought it was a great way to like be well-rounded. And my first job, I graduated in 2015, and my first job out of college was actually at the Rio 2016 Olympics. Through connections, I got a job there as a social media editor, and it was a really great experience. My family's from Brazil, so I speak Portuguese, and I went there to work, which was really great. I was like thrown into this situation where a lot of people didn't like, we didn't have a lot of people speaking English fluently, and so I was really like helpful in like the social media department. I was basically me and like two other people doing all the social media all the time for like 6 months, like up from like before the Olympics to the Olympics. Worked odd jobs in between. Eventually in 2018, I went to the Olympic channel and worked with the Olympics again. If you like hear this story, you're like, wow, Virginia loves sports. No, I knew nothing about sports before working at the Olympics. It just kind of happened and it fell into my lap, and I took the opportunity and went with it. And I learned a lot about like social media and like management and even like PR, like crisis management. Obviously, the Rio 2016 Olympics had quite a bit of that. And it was really great, but it also made me realize that the part of that that I really like to do was the part where I was posting the news stories. And so I was like, maybe I should go into like doing social media for news. So that's really when my like mind started thinking about that. While I was doing odd jobs, like in between, I was trying to look for jobs. And when I was looking, everything that I wanted was in New York. And so I was like, maybe this is a sign that I need to move to New York. And so I had been living at home and like saving up money. And I decided to, after I came back from Madrid, which is where the Olympic Channel headquarters are, I, like 2 weeks later, booked a flight to New York, and I moved officially to New York, which was a crazy time. I didn't have a job. And it took me 3 months to find a job. I stopped tracking how many jobs I applied to because I had applied to like, I probably like 300 at this point. I just stopped after like 150. And eventually I landed a fellowship with Business Insider / Insider or Insider Inc., whatever you want to call it. And that's basically how my journey started. I was a social media fellow. I, during my fellowship, moved over to working the weekends, and then I got hired full-time to work weekends as an associate distribution producer. Our like team is called the distribution team. So we work on social media, push alerts, and partnerships. So basically anything off platform. Every news organization has a different name for that, but mine is distribution. And then I recently got promoted to distribution editor. So right now we're actually looking for someone to replace me on the weekends, and I get to work regular weekdays. But we'll see. We're figuring that out still. So currently I'm still working weekends, but I basically run social media, a little bit of partnerships. So working with like apps like Flipboard, Apple News, that kind of thing, and push alerts. So yeah, that's my little journey.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, I know we have a lot to talk about, and one of the topics that I do want to cover is this. Most of the students in the class are writing a blog this semester, and they're writing about a topic. They're trying to get a community, and they're trying to build their brand and connect with audiences and things like that. It sounds like that's a lot of what y'all both do, kind of on a daily basis, especially trying to keep in touch with the latest trends, with the, everything from pop culture, but also the latest platforms, and understanding how people are increasingly using these platforms and products outside of the main traditional kind of product. And so I'd love to just kind of talk about that for a little bit, and how you're able to, first of all, I'd like to know what are your teams like when you're working on a project, and how big are your teams, and what departments are you communicating with to make your job happen? Maira, maybe you can go first. How big is your team, and who do you work with kind of on a daily basis?
Sure. So I work with basically every editor in the culture department every day. And my job requires a lot of collaboration, whether that's story conception to how do we get it to readers. So our department, including reporters, is about 75 people. So it's a pretty big department, one of the biggest features departments at the Times. And we're always talking about how, who is the audience for a story and what's the best way to reach them. So for us, part of our strategy for quite some time has been thinking about how we reach people on search. One of our big objectives is to increase our subscriber base, which, I'm proud to announce that we have 7 million subscribers now as of our latest earnings call, which we're all super proud of. And so that is one way we're doing that. And then in terms of, off platform, we use Facebook and we use Twitter, and we have for a long time. Our strategy has shifted in terms of how we present things on there. Like, we're doing a lot more Twitter moments. We are trying to boost signals of our reporters. Our reporters are authorities in the subject areas that they cover. So making sure that we boost them through our, whether that's the main account or the NY Times Arts account, which I run, because we have about 2 million, more than 2 million followers on our Twitter account alone. So it sends a strong signal boost anytime we retweet one of our reporters. So, we're doing that, but we've also expanded more into Instagram. Obviously, visual platform, a lot of younger readers are on there, and we're trying different things. We actually have a team now that's dedicated solely to Instagram. And some of those people are visual editors, which I think is an important equation in all of this, is thinking about visuals and how those can tell a story too. So that's a big part of our strategy. We're thinking more about newsletters too, I think in a more thoughtful way. We're not just sending out a list of links or anything. It's like we're trying to build a voice around that. And one of the ways we've done that is with the morning briefing, which now is headed by David Leonhardt. It used to be, we had several editors sort of compile our best stories of the day, but now we wanted like a real sort of voice and personality behind it, and David's been great for that. So, those are some of the strategies we've taken on. And then in terms of like actually talking to our readers, something that we've started to do is think more about how we talk to our readers in our comments. Our comments are moderated, so it's a good way to really engage with readers, and it's important to us that they know that we're listening too. So we're definitely going to focus on that in the next year.
That's great. One thing before I get to Virginia, real quick, I wanted to ask you on your Twitter account. It says that you focus on what is it? Boost. I'm sorry, I just lost it. But story, signal, boost. Can you talk about signal, story, and you do it?
Yeah.
What is it? Explain to us what that means.
So I like to think of myself as sort of like the cheerleader of our department, and part of that is boosting signals, whether it's for our reporters and editors who sort of want their voice heard on like a particular story, like they really want to send out there, and then in terms of like the actual like digital signals that they send out, making sure that we're doing everything possible to optimize our posts, our articles themselves, so we reach the maximum audience possible. And so I consider myself sort of the central figure in making that happen.
That's great.
And
I love that.
Yeah, and so it's like I want to boost you both morally,
Hmm.
but also like obviously your story because I want as many people as possible to read it.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. And so, Virginia, can you talk a little bit about the team you work on and kind of how big of the team is, what that looks like for you, and also how are you trying to, thinking about engaging audiences today? I know you said you do a lot with social media, of course. That's a whole conversation we could have, but talk a little bit about that if you would.
Yeah, definitely. So my team is much smaller than Myra's. Our distribution team is divided into two sections. So the web side and then the video side, just because that's how Insider is kind of set up. And so the web team has about 10 people split between the US and the UK. Because we have a really big, like BI UK is really big. And so our office there is a really big part of our whole strategy. And so it's really a smaller team. We kind of work with basically like the entire newsroom. We don't really like have like the sections or like the verticals. I mean, there's obviously different verticals within the website, but we just work with all of them. And so it's a little bit different than the New York Times, but that's to be like get like you can assume that like because we're so different, so much smaller. But yeah, so we work with like Facebook is our biggest traffic driver, definitely, but also search is really high up there. I think for Insider, Facebook is higher than search, but for Business Insider, search is higher than social. And we obviously have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram is a really big one that we're also like changing up. And I think that in the past like few months, we've really changed our Insider Instagram to be more like news focused. We have more graphics that kind of like have explainers, kind of like the ones that go viral, I would say. Like we were kind of trying to emulate that, trying to see, what kind of things that our audience on Instagram wants because they are so much younger than like the regular Business Insider reader. Like especially because we started as a business publication, a lot of our readers on like Twitter or on specifically the BI accounts, they're much older and they want to know about like markets and stocks and stuff. And it's not work on Instagram because all the kids are like 12. We also have started a TikTok account, which I think is a fun little thing that we're doing. I'm not very involved in it, but I did ask Elizabeth, who's more involved in it, to like give me a little bit more info. And so we work with TikTok. We're part of their creative learning fund. So we basically get paid to post educational and informational content on TikTok, which is really great. It's a really fun thing that they're doing. Obviously, we're still testing out a billion strategies, but they mostly like do smaller, short, like 30-second videos. A lot of times repurposing videos that we already had for other platforms like Facebook or YouTube. And I don't know a lot about video, but that's my little spiel on that. I focus more on the Twitter, and we also have been doing a lot of moments, a lot of Twitter threads. I think that that's the best way to engage the Twitter audience. I think breaking things down and making it like digestible on the actual platform rather than making someone click into an article is what we're really focusing on right now, because Twitter doesn't bring us a lot of traffic, but it does inform a lot of people. And I feel like anyone that's like journalism related in any way likes to follow these kind of accounts, even though it's not like the everyday Joe that's like following us. And I was going to say something else, but I lost it now. But that's something to start
Yeah.
with.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, you both touched on something that I think is just, a trend in every industry right now, especially with legacy organizations where the product of, 20 years ago is not at all the product of today. And so whether it's a magazine or a newspaper today, like you said, Myra, I mean, you're doing everything from podcasts to newsletters to, our social media and platforms and, videos, and having a presence on all these different social media accounts. It's just, I mean, you need a whole team of people working together to take the content and kind of dressing it and strategizing it for each platform and outlet. And so that is a challenge, but it's also a big opportunity because you can kind of be creative like never before, like making TikToks. I think that's so innovative because it's finding people where they're at. And I think that's like the challenge of any kind of news organization today is, where are people and how do we build content that meets them there? in their community and in their place already. And so it's a challenge, but it's I see that obviously it's happening throughout all of media. So
yeah, and I just want to say really quick that like my boss always says that Insider is what we like to call a distributed platform, and we like to be where the audience is. So like that's like the main goal of my team, is to make sure that the content is where people are, like not to expect people to like come to us, like make us go to them. So we're always looking for like the different platforms. When TikTok started, it was just Elizabeth being like, I really like TikTok, let's see what we can do there. And like she came up with a strategy for that. And so I think that that's like the main like mantra of like our team and how we really function.
that's great.
Yeah, I would agree. That's an excellent point that you make. Just having a strategy going in, I think, is really key to working on a new platform, because not every platform may be right for your organization too. Like we've decided that TikTok isn't the right platform for us, but that's for now. I mean, who knows? Maybe in the future we'll change our minds. But one, being aware that there's a new platform, and making having the best understanding of it that you can, and seeing if it fits your product, and if it doesn't, then that's okay. Like you form your strategy around what's out there, and yeah, you have to meet your audience where they're at. That's an excellent point from both of you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a challenge, not just kind of meeting them where they're at too, but also during, and we just have a question from the chat, which I will get to. So if anybody has questions on the chat, please ask them. But I thought it was a good question from Ryan. Taking that strategy and converting it in a COVID world. You both went through COVID in New York, and it would be really interesting to hear you talk about, what were the thoughts and conversations going on at the Times and at Insider. You both are probably you're both working from home, obviously. Could you just both talk about that transition, both kind of professionally, personally in New York City, and then also in terms of your coverage and what kind of conversations you had around the table about connecting people with information, especially, because of breaking news every day. So maybe Maira, if you'd like to start.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, I still remember like clear as day, like the day we made the call to, all work from home. My boss, took us into a meeting room, and he's like, what do people need to know if they're not going to be back in the office tomorrow, and for an undetermined, period of time? We were like, sort of sat there for a second with our mouths open, and reality set in. I think, Virginia, you probably had this experience too. Like we were all sort of, we knew what was happening in China, and people were starting to get, I think, a little aware and a little scared too about what was coming next. So sort of preparing, like everybody was buying up hand sanitizer and Clorox wipes, but yeah. And all the essentials you need to prep, basically. And it was, and from there it very quickly became a conversation of like, okay, what tools do we have now to communicate with one another? How can we best prepare everyone to make sure that they know how to use those tools, and that they don't have issues connecting, and do they have the right setups, basically. Fortunately, we have a team in the newsroom that's dedicated to this, and they helped out a lot. We set up meetings as quickly as we could that people could call into, like just reminders on, this is the best place to go for X information on Slack. We're going to set up like regular Google Hangouts to have our like morning and afternoon meetings. So, sort of like procedural stuff like that sort of helped us get through the day to day. But, it was a little bit, learn as you go too. We were fortunate in that a lot of our people had been trained up on this. So for some people, it was just like reminding them this is the best way to get in touch. And then, going from there, and it was a pretty successful transition. I think everybody was really surprised by like how well we were able to just kind of do everything from home. It wasn't perfect, it still isn't. And yeah, there are some things that are very hard. I think our department in particular like requires a lot of collaboration, especially in my role, because I have to talk to a lot of different people about you know, when things are publishing, what are they going to look like, what sort of story form are they going to take, so I can, you know, sort of best like tune a story for a particular audience. So those things are challenging. They've gotten better, but you know, nothing beats being in a newsroom, I think, with your colleagues and being able to like brainstorm and, you know, bounce things off of each other. So that part I certainly miss.
Yeah, for me, I like wasn't a manager when this all happened. I was an assistant or an associate distribution producer, so I was like just an entry level position. Didn't have anyone below me, so I wasn't really involved in any of the decisions or anything. But I do remember clear as the day, the day that they sent the email that, you know, we weren't coming back to the office. I actually remember the day before. So on a Monday, I was in the office, but as I work weekends, Tuesday and Wednesdays are my weekends. And so that Monday, I was like chatting to everyone. Obviously, we had been covering, you know, everything that was going on with the coronavirus already. And so we all were like, I wonder if this is going to be like, you know, if they're going to close our office. They had just canceled South by, and like, I just pushed that. And I was like, oh my God, like maybe this is really happening. And I actually had a trip planned to come to Texas for a friend's wedding that weekend. And so everything happened in like 1 week. And I'm still in Texas. So I'm not in New York. But so that weekend I like flew to Texas and then just stayed here because I was like, everything is getting worse. Why would I go back to New York now? And then eventually my lease was up and I went back to New York just to move my things out. And now I'm staying in Texas for now, which is really great and something that Insider is allowing me to do, and allowing a lot of people to do. I think a lot of people were like flew home, especially because my team is a lot of young people. I'm like the oldest one on my team, other than like our head of audience. And so it's really like everyone like went home, like everyone was like in a different state. Now everyone's kind of back in New York, but I'm staying here for now. But yeah, I think that the transition went pretty smoothly. I think that at least for me on the weekends, I was already working from home. And so we already had that down, at least for the weekend strategy in terms of like talking to the editors and all of that. Also, just in general, a lot of our processes were already on Slack and we're already like that, just because, you know, big newsroom, people are further away, like, and it's obviously, you know, turning to your friend and being like, hey, I'm going to go out for lunch is much easier than having to Slack them and be like, be back in 30 minutes, like much easier to just be like, hey, I'm leaving. And then they know when you come back. But so it was definitely hard to like figure that out, especially when you're, you know, manning push alerts or doing something that's like very like breaking news. You really need to communicate. And so we did struggle with that a little bit at the beginning, I feel like. Still struggle a little bit now, but as things like, you know, got better, I feel like this election week was really intense in terms of like just needing to have people online, like on their screen all the time. And I think we really, I mean, we did it. We did great. And I think it was like a nice, smooth transition. But yeah, I wasn't a manager in any way when it started. So I wasn't in any of these conversations. I just got the email and then suddenly was on a plane to Texas and stayed here. So I'm in my like childhood bedroom now and still here. And it's very weird to be, you know, working my New York job in Austin, Texas, and like look out the door and just see like the driveway that I grew up in. So, or the window, not the door.
Does that mean Rosenthal's there?
He is. He's way in his room though.
Oh man, that'd be
He
great.
has his own office.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you brought up the election because I do want to bring that up just because that's another, I mean, we just finished a tumultuous, I mean, we're wrapping up a very tumultuous last few months and week. And so, I mean, it seems like, you know, coverage has to change based on obviously what's happening in the news and then also these crazy things like the pandemic. But this has been a very interesting election year as well, in many ways. And so I think that kind of, you know, how have you been able, I mean, again, what kind of conversations have you been having this past week as you kind of roll out information to your platforms and people? And, you know, have there been any kind of creative new ways of telling stories that you've discovered through this process, or maybe tried things that you never have before. I know during the whole election, I was just on the New York Times homepage, just refreshing like constantly, even though it probably was an auto refreshing infographic, but it was one of those things where it's like, we want update and you know, working in push notifications that you're doing, Virginia and things like that. How do you communicate, and did you communicate, and what kind of lessons did you learn, and what kind of, you know, new maybe platforms did you try out, and you know, what was it like? Big question, but maybe Maira can start.
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, like my department, you know, it's pretty far removed from politics. So, a lot of our strategy centered around counter programming, which I think was really important and key in terms of like getting, you know, keeping people occupied while they're waiting for results, which was like our whole idea around this. So something we did is like we pushed out like we have several lists that like lists like the best movies on like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Disney Plus and whatnot. And so we push those out every night. We also wrote this really great piece from our former chess columnist about the Queen's Gambit. If you guys have seen that show on Netflix, it's been a real hit. And a lot of people have enjoyed reading our pieces about that. So in terms of like what they did on politics, I mean, they are a machine. Like they just stun me every election season. And it's really amazing to see all the planning that they had to do. We have what we call live briefings, which are basically our live updating articles that where we put our biggest news in, and there is a whole machine around those, which in part helps to distribute news quickly, and we did a lot of our news alerts based on that. But they're also geared towards search as well. So our readers who, you know, are Googling for like the latest like presidential update, you know, could get it through that way. So that was an important factor there. Another thing we did too, and this is, you know, all on platform, but I think it was important. We started doing this project called Daily Distortions, and it's this very sort of user-friendly, like swipeable content on our home screens that highlighted a piece of misinformation, and our tech writers would explain like, you know, what exactly that piece of misinformation was, and explaining the real, like, you know, factual part of it. So, you know, those were some things we tried on platform. As far as you know, off platform, our Facebook and Twitter feeds were really, and when I say this, I mean like our main New York Times accounts were really focused on the election, because we knew that's what readers wanted. And then in terms of counter programming, we did that more towards the end of the day, and geared to sort of a general audience too, who we knew had found these articles in the past and they were successful, and, you know, served like their need for like counter programming.
Yeah, and I think I can just start bouncing off of what Maira just ended saying. We also focused our Twitter accounts mostly on our main Twitter accounts, so Business Insider and Insider, mostly on the election as well. Like we were really, you know, making sure that that's where everything was going, because we do have a lot of sub pages, and so really any other content would just go on the sub pages. Usually we would retweet them or, you know, move them around and put them on the main pages, but for the election we just didn't do that. For my team, I mean, it was a lot of planning how we were going to be able to cover for 24 hours with such a small team. Usually we have like one person on nights, but obviously the nights were like a really big part of when we got results. And Insider was able to call the election this year because we partnered with the Decision Desk. And so it was a really big, I guess, like a task for Cassidy, my manager, for her to like really put things together. And I also helped kind of figure out, you know, when the interns were going to come in, when we were going to come in, who was going to stay till 2 a.m, which is waiting until UK logs on so that they can take over. And planning that was a really big part of that. And then we also planned out push notifications for basically, I say I was not part of this, but Cassidy and the news editors, like they were amazing. They drafted out, every push notification that we could send. Obviously, we didn't do exactly what they drafted, but it was a really great way to like at least have an idea. In terms of pushes, we had like a push lead every hour of the day, and so we would hand off to each other after like 4 hours. It was a really great way to like balance it, just so that people kind of were focusing on a little bit of everything. And we really focused on like Twitter a lot. We don't get a lot of traffic from Twitter, but it really was working for us this election. I feel like it was a really great platform for us, and being able to do those threads and breaking things down was really a great thing. We started kind of quote tweeting from each other, so from insider to business insider and back and forth, especially with something like the election where we can do that because both audiences will be interested in it. And so we really started doing that quote tweeting with like more information, trying to like make sure that everyone was informed of everything. It doesn't matter like which account they were on. Also, pushing the election was a really big thing. And then for Insider, a really big thing is that we called the election for Biden on Friday and not on Saturday because of Decision Desk. So Decision Desk did their own thing, and we follow Decision Desk. And so we sent out everything, and a big part of like what we had to do was just like post Instagram comments being like explaining why we're doing this, because all these people were commenting like this is fake news, like we're like, okay, just because AP doesn't call it doesn't mean we can't call it. Like that's not how it works. People don't know how it works, and people don't realize that there are different like companies or outlets calling things. And we didn't call Arizona, but AP called Arizona. So that was another reason that people were like, you're lying, you have the count wrong. And we're like, we don't have the count wrong. This is our count. This is how we're doing it. And so I was figuring out how to like really make sure that the audience knew that. And then also Twitter has this big thing up that if you tweet about the election being projected, you have to tag whoever it's in reference to. And so we had to tag the Decision Desk every single tweet for every single thing. And we got flagged one time, one auto tweet went out without it. But other than that, we were really good about it. And so that was a really big thing that we all had to be like super, made sure that the newsroom knew as well, because as Maira said, that they do is we also do, which is retweeting our journalists and what they tweet out. And they had to also abide to these rules, because everyone has to abide to these rules all the way through inauguration. And so that was definitely a strategy that we were doing. And so it was really weird that we called it a day before, but then I was online when we called it again when all of the other news outlets called it. So it was an interesting thing to have to like be like, yep, we called it on Friday, but now everyone else is calling it, so I guess we have to push it out again. And so we did. But
yeah, the first I heard about it was on Vox, and they had, and of all the outlets I was following, and they were following Decision Desk as well. And so I saw all the kind of follow-ups they had to do, all the posts they had to do. I mean, it's streamlined through all of their accounts, kind of explaining why they called it, and because so many people had questions. And so I guess I didn't realize Business Insider did that as well. So that must have been chaotic, to say the least.
Yes, we did. It was basically just Insider and Fox. Like all of the other like bigger outlets follow AP or have their own Decision Desks and didn't do it. And so we were like, well, we got to do it. It's fine. Yeah. We had like a big explainer, and we talked to the guy from Decision Desk who explained why he made that call and why he didn't call Arizona. And so we had a whole explainer on it. We made a Twitter thread, put it on every single Instagram post that we had, and all of that.
Yeah. To clarify, I said Vox. That is a hard one to.
Yes,
not
Vox.
Okay.
Not Fox.
And then Maira, and y'all obviously are using the AP. Every time I checked that, infographic, I was, clicking on it and tagging. I'm sure everybody was, like to just give the breakdown.
We had millions upon millions of viewers on the presidential election results. So our approach was, so we sort of take everyone, and the team that does all the tabulations basically has this methodology that uses Decision Desk, Associated Press, the networks, and based on all of those results, then they decide whether or not to call the race. And I was following Nate Cohn, who leads the Upshot, and some of his posts are like, he's like X number of votes, ahead, and we're not calling the election. I sensed a little bit of wanting to call, but there are a lot of people involved in the decision. So, and lots of different things that they took into account. And I think on Saturday, once there was a clear margin of that Biden was ahead in Pennsylvania, and taking into account the provisional ballots and the mail-in ballots that have been counted at that point based on the counties too, they finally made the decision to make the call. But it definitely was not taken lightly. I actually had CNN on when they made the call, because I could, like, based on some chatter that I was hearing, I was like, okay, I think it's time to turn on the TV to see what's going to happen. And then sure enough, we called it not too long after CNN and the networks and AP called it. But yeah, it's taking all of those different outlets into account before we made our call. And we definitely wanted to err on the side of caution. I mean, caution was the big thing for us. Not to say that Decision Desk was like, not cautious or anything like that. That was their call to make. And I mean, we ended up making the same call, obviously, but it's just, a lot of thought went into it. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that well, I know Insider doesn't really have anyone that's doing our own tabulations in any way. Like, we have one guy that really understands about it, so he was like heading all of it, and so we were really just following Decision Desk and what they did, as long as Walt decided that it was okay. And we also partnered with them in terms of, like, we've been working with them the whole year for, like, through their primaries as well. And so we really, like, followed everything they did. And so they didn't call Arizona, and so we didn't call Arizona. And then when he felt like it was, or not he, the Decision Desk people in general, I don't know exactly how that works, to be very honest. Don't know how many people are on the Decision Desk HQ, but when they decided that it was good to call Pennsylvania, when we called Pennsylvania, we could call the whole race because we hadn't called Arizona. I think they took more of a risk with Pennsylvania. At least that's, our speculation, but that's just my speculation, really.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that side of it, because I mean, I even asked all the students in my last Wednesday class. I did a poll in the middle of lecture, and I just asked, how are you getting your election news? Is it through TV or social media or a website or Google, or like, what are you using? And most people said social media. That was the primary method. TV was, I think, the smallest. I didn't put radio on there, but that might have been the smallest. But no, it was social media mostly. And I know I was just using Google, honestly. And it was pulling from the AP sources. And so it's just interesting to see, not just, how do you cover it, but where do people go to get this information? And, how are, it's changing so fast, and it is hard to stay up, like Maira was saying, like, we're not on TikTok, and that's okay, because I mean, you can't do everything, but also you have to make sure that it is, it works for your audience and your go where people are. So,
yeah, totally. I think the other side of it too is just like staffing. Like,
yeah.
If you're going to feed something, you have to have someone there to feed it. And like, if our priorities elsewhere, then we're going to shift our staff to those priorities.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting to hear all this. We don't have a whole lot of time left. I do want to shift to more kind of career stuff, advice type of stuff. And students, if you have any questions, please feel free to chat it. But I've seen a few questions already about just, it says that, y'all both moved from Texas to New York City in a field of Mass Comm. Is that kind of the only path, for pursuing a field in Mass Comm?
Good God, I hope, I really, I wish it wasn't. Let me tell you that.
New York City.
New York's great. I have a love-hate relationship with New York. And part of this maybe has to do with the fact that I have a child now, and like, it's people raise kids here all the time, and everybody everybody's fine. But I think because I grew up in a small town in Texas, like, approaching that has been sort of a little bit different and difficult in my mind, but we're definitely, doing fine regardless. I mean, I I personally, and I'm totally speaking for myself here, I am troubled by the fact that so much of our media is concentrated in the Northeast. I don't think that's good for for the public. I don't think it's good for democracy. Like, we have to have different perspectives, and there are a lot of great organizations like throughout the US. In Texas Tribune, I am a huge fan of theirs. Evan Smith has built an amazing organization there. And but the reality is, a lot of big newspaper focused media organizations are struggling right now. Some are doing better than others, and the pandemic certainly didn't do any favors. I think part of it is, like, it's going to be incumbent on the leaders of those organizations to make sure that they have the resources to cover their areas, because we need it. Like, we can't be the only organization that like covers America. Like, that's an impossible task, and I want us to be competitive. I want people, like, all over the country to have strong news organizations, because it helps readers, it helps democracy, it helps, like, it just provides different perspectives. And digital media has made great inroads in that. Like, I love that BuzzFeed finally, like, turned a profit, that in their latest call. And I just hope and pray that that continues for lots of other organizations too. And it's just going to take a lot of, like, thinking and deciding what the best sort of, like, financial structure makes these things possible, so they don't have to exist in just the Northeast media ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with basically everything that Myra said. And I think that when I first started looking at jobs, I mean, actually, before we do that, I've always wanted to live in LA. That was, like, my dream growing up. And my sister actually really wanted to live in New York. And we ended up flipping dreams, because I went into journalism and she went into film. And so it kind of, like, flipped. And then New York was just the place that every job that I looked at, where I was like, that's my dream job. Literally everything was in New York. And that's what, like, made me move. I was like, I have money saved up. I'm just going to go, because clearly my address being here wasn't helping. It's definitely possible. And I don't want anyone to take that as, like, you have to move to New York to get a job in New York. It's not necessarily how it works. But for me, it was easier to just get up and move, because I had the financial stability to do so. But I know not everyone does. But it was definitely, like, eye-opening to me that I basically had to just switch from, like, my idea of, like, my dream place is LA, like, beachy vibes, and then moving over to, like, now I want to live in a busy city. Like, it was very different. And I'm a very adaptable person. It's all good. I'm fine with New York. I really enjoy it, and I'm very happy there. But I also like, I follow Texas Tribune a lot. I think that a lot of local organizations, I mean, local news is really important too. And I think that, like, you can definitely have so much of an impact by working for, like, a local news organization. I think that's so important, even though I didn't actually do that. I kind of skipped that step in my career in a way. But it is something that I think about a lot. And obviously, I don't have a kid yet, but it is something that I do think about. And I'm like, maybe moving back to Texas is something further down in my career that I would want to do. And so I definitely look around and pay attention to that kind of thing. But I don't think that moving to New York is, like, the end all for every mass comm major, but it's definitely a hub for sure.
And I would say too, not to speak too much on Myra's behalf, but going to grad school with, in that time was a hard time for media. I know that was a time when, like, the stock market was crashed, and, like, 2008 was hard for everybody. I know Detroit went bankrupt that year, and that's where I'm from.
Mm.
But it's just kind of like when you graduate, you start looking for jobs. I mean, I remember Maira was, I mean, you worked for the University Star, you had your grad degree and you were applying, but you were kind of like hustling like hard because you were getting like your own stories working as a freelance. I remember one time, I think you drove out to like the coast to do a story, writing your own, like, because you cared about it and you just wanted to
Yeah.
show, like, report these stories, and you busted your ass. You know, it was like you were working really hard.
Yeah, I mean, I, I, what I will say, like that time definitely has a lot of parallels to now, which, hopefully you guys, what we're telling you here will, be insightful and helpful. But yeah, I mean, it was a lot of busting my ass and, a lot of, taking freelance assignments where I could. And those don't always pay great. Some do, better than others. And part of it was just, continuing to like, talk to people in my network. Cindy Royal was a huge, factor in that. She connected me to great people, including the person who, led me to the Times basically. And yeah, just working really hard and staying in touch with people was a big part of that. And the other thing I'll say too is like, you build a network and like you may not get results right away, which I think was what happened in my case. Like it took time, like, but from the time I left graduate school to the time I got the job at the Statesman, it was a 6-7 months. So like, and I was doing freelancing in between there and working at a publishing company, but not quite journalism yet. And so yeah, I would urge you guys to, be patient, just work on your networks, keep in touch with people, be genuine. And those things will produce returns, if not right away. And I think that's sort of the biggest lesson I learned in that time.
Yeah, it's not really, I'm going to move to New York, and then you just land a job. It's and Virginia worked hard too, like while you worked for the Olympics, and you had
Yeah.
connections, and it was yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, I was gonna answer because I saw someone like mentioned if I did anything to like make up for like not having the local journalism experience. And I think that like I graduated college in 2015. I got my insider fellowship in 2018. So it was almost 3 years. I graduated in December of 2015. So it was almost 3 years after I graduated college. In those 3 years, I worked 6 months in Rio at the Olympics, and I worked 3 months in Madrid for the other Olympics. But other than that, I was doing every kind of odd job. Like I was working retail. I worked at a bakery that my family friends own, and did like tried to help them with their social media a little bit. And I worked for a kids soccer school doing marketing. So like I was definitely doing odd jobs. And also someone else asked like tips to like save money to go to New York. I lived at home. I lived at home the last like year and a half of college because my parents live in Austin, so that's very helpful. And a great place to be anyway. And so I lived at home. I saved as much money as I possibly could. At one point, I was working 3 jobs at the same time, and really just like doing anything while I was still, trying to get into journalism. I was applying to jobs and I was really like trying to do that, but it just wasn't working out for me. And I think that that's totally okay. And as someone who like looks at resumes, like just because you don't have journalism job doesn't mean I'm not going to be like not going to look at you at all. I think someone else mentioned this, but like writing something in your cover letter about anything that you've done is also really important. And so like in my cover letter, this isn't for everyone, but in my cover letter, I did mention like my love for social media and how it came from like liking Justin Bieber. My dad hates that story, and he's like, that's the worst way to start a cover letter. But it worked for me, and it's the truth in how I got into social media. And then once I had my Olympic experience, that was when I started, talking about how like I mentioned, working for them, I made me realize that working for the news part is what I wanted to do. And so that's how I like hookshotted this job and like got this job. And I think that cover letters are so important. And as someone who like has looked at fellows applying, I need your cover letter. Like, I need you to tell me why you're so great. And if there's not a place for a cover letter, put it with your resume. Just like do it. Just write one anyway. Just do it. It's worth it, I promise you. Because it's really hard to tell, you know, if you don't have that experience. But if you can anecdote your way into the experience, then that works. And that's totally fine.
That's
Sorry, I
great.
went like
No, that's
completely
great. That's
in
exactly
other direction.
we
But
want to go that way, because students are looking for jobs. They're looking for those jobs, you know. And I remember one of the worst cover letters I wrote, I was applying for a publications writer position, and I spelled writer R-I-T-E-R. So they did not call me back. I'm sure that's framed somewhere. And so it's just like, you know, the cover letter matters. Judy Oscom, our director, asked a question before she left, or earlier, and she kind of wanted to know where y'all see yourself in 5 years, and what kind of like career paths do they have in each of your organizations, and you know, how do you move up? I guess, like, could you talk a little bit about kind of the career path for each of you forward?
That's a good question.
You don't
I
have to answer
I
it.
I I think like the way I envision it is a combination of getting to call the shots on some of the stories that we decide to publish. I guess in a way I get to do a little bit of that, but maybe in a broader sense. Diversity and inclusion is an incredibly important thing for me. I want to see more diverse voices in our report, and I feel like I've made that point clear to my bosses, and I'm thankful to work for an organization that cares about that very much. So I think something along those lines, and continuing to find ways to reach our audience, because talking to our readers, I think, is extremely important, especially if we want to grow our subscriber base.
And do you have like mentors that kind of help you if you want to go somewhere? They kind of can, shepherd you to that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, inside the organization, like my boss, Gilbert Cruz, who's the editor of the culture department, has been great. He's someone who comes from a Latin background too, and we definitely can relate to one another. So I'm happy to work for someone like that who sort of understands where I come from, sort of culturally. But beyond that, I'm very fortunate to have worked with so many great men and women in our organization. And even our politics editor, Pat Healy, used to be one of my bosses. Is someone that I go to. Another editor who is the deputy editor in Hong Kong. Her name's Yonette Joseph. She was a huge, champion for me too. And people like that, if you find your people, like you can kind of do, the sky's the limit, I think. And having really supportive bosses and colleagues goes a long way, and just being collegial and supporting one another is really important. So I'm happy that I've been able to make those connections in my time here, and that's probably why I've been here for 8 years, and I'm not sure they can get rid of me anytime soon. So I'm sticking around.
That's good. That's good. Anything you want to add, Virginia?
I love that. I think that I agree. I think that my boss is definitely someone that like is always, being career oriented and trying to help me out. And for me, moving out of the weekends was a really big priority, because I had been on weekends for 2 years, almost like a year and a half, really. And obviously, like, the weekends are great. I learned a lot, and working the weekends was probably the best thing that happened to me, because I got to do so much more than I was doing during the week, even as an intern. And so working the weekends was really great, and I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to get a job that like isn't what everyone else wants. Like, yeah, sure, you can't go out to brunch, but it's worth it in the end, because you get to do all these things. I mean, I was literally at a fellow job, I was doing the same things that like the distribution editor was doing. Like now that I got promoted to distribution editor, my promotion was really easy because I was like, here's a list of things that I already do, and here's the list of things that the distribution editor does. Like it seems like I should take this role. And so in nicer words, obviously it was a nicely written cover letter like email to my boss, not just like that, but it was definitely conversations that we've had, and my bosses have those conversations. I think that's for me, like I'm just starting out to be a manager, so now I'm managing fellows, and that's one of the big things that they teach us is to like help people with their career goals, and that should be a priority as a fellow manager, which is great. And I think that mine did that, and I hope that someday I do that with others. And so for me personally, I think that like I'm going to focus on just this right now. This promotion to distribution editor is a really great thing for me. I think that that's great. And for now, I think that that's kind of the way that I want to go. I want to keep working in this like distribution or off platform kind of role. I think it's what I like to do most. And however I keep going up the ladder, I will. And I'm just really excited to like have this next step where I get to really work with like strategy, because I started doing that on the weekend, and now I get to really focus in on it more.
That's great. We're gonna wrap it up a little bit. I just have a couple last few questions. Would be what classes do you think help prepare you the most for the job that you have right now, and what advice do you give students who are wanting a job in a digital career today?
I, some of our basic classes, like Kim Fox's intro to journalism, like that's the basics. Like you get the basics and then you're solid from there. But Cindy Royal's skills classes in particular are really helpful for me in terms of like demonstrating that I had the skill set to do things like write HTML. I had a deep understanding of social media and video editing. So those were all really fundamental. But something that I thought about recently, we had this course in graduate school that was specifically focused on like web theory and new media. And the more I think about that, like that may have been in the end like the most important class I took, because it made you think sort of critically and analytically about how do you approach new forms of communication, which like every time there's a new platform, like I think it's key to like understand like how do we embrace it, how do we create a strategy around it. And a lot of that takes sort of like that same sort of critical thought and analysis that I learned in that course that I have now been able to apply in the real world, though it was not like a skills course necessarily. So I would say those were probably the top ones, and just showing that you have a demonstrated understanding of new technologies and new ways of communicating is huge, and just showing that you can how to approach something new and find a way to make it work for your audience, like that's a big step, I think.
That's great. I think that's something that every student that's in the FDOM class can take with them is you now have a microcosm of a blog, a website that you can now take control of. It's your brand. You can try out what you want to make it work. And if you show that growth and you demonstrate the skills to an employer, I think that is huge. So, that's key to it. Virginia, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I not to like toot your horn, but FDOM was definitely the class that like I think made the most impact. And obviously anything that like, web design as well, even though, it was just the basics, but just knowing what HTML is and like understanding, like I work with RSS feeds because of the way that the platform that we use to like put things on social. And me being able to like read the RSS feeds like impressed the product girl that was working with me. And I was like, I mean, it's just an RSS feed, like it's nothing crazy, but like most of the people on my team didn't know how to do that. And so that's definitely one. And I think that, what you mentioned about personal brand, I think that's a really just a really big one. I always look for people on Twitter when I'm like gonna interview them, and I think it's just fun to follow other people and find each other. And my personal brand, when I was in your class, I made another account, and then I eventually switched back, actually after I had a conversation with you about it. I don't know if you
I
remember
probably
this, but
encourage you to let them all be one. And not
yes,
have
you
two.
did. You
Good.
did. And it was a really great thing for me, I think. It made me realize that, you know, my personal brand is me. Like I don't need to make up this persona of professional me.
Yeah.
I'm not like I never tweeted anything crazy, but I still went back and like deleted maybe a little bit of like the really crazy like high school me.
Right.
But I've had the same Twitter account since 2009, and so I was like, I don't know, a junior in high school or something. So had to deal with it a little bit,
You
but
know, you got to embrace it though. That is part of your story. That's part of who you are. How many
exactly.
are there? There's one. So let that, you know, be both professional and personal. I think that's the beauty of social media.
Yeah, it is. And I think that that's why I was so glad that you like had that conversation with me, and it made me realize that like, yeah, it's okay that I tell people that like Justin Bieber is how I like found my passion for social media. It is, it's true. I saw him like grow as an artist and
Yeah.
use social media as a platform, and that's what made me interested in it. And I think that that's a fun anecdote to tell people.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think that that was great. And then I also think that my PR background actually really helped me in terms of being and like thinking more of like the whole brand of the journalism company, which is something that I think that a lot of journalists don't really think of. You know, there are things where I'm like, we really need to, you know, make sure that this is the same, or like, you know, if we're going to post something on Instagram, like our voice has to be similar at least to like what we're saying and on Twitter and like that kind of thing. Also, I mean, that was something that was really big at Rio 2016 as well, because it was just a bunch of journalists that were doing social media. And I was like, okay, you can't be able to tell that like I live tweeted this and that Ian live tweeted this. Like it has to be different. It has to be the same. It can't be different. So I think that even I don't even know what class that was that would impact me. Like writing for PR, I think was the class that was like, I still have actually right next to me, I have two binders of information from college that like my campaigns class and my PR writing portfolios. I found them the other day and I still really like keeping them because they're fun. But yeah, I think that those are definitely the classes that most impacted me.
That's awesome. I saw the thumbs up from Nicole. We should have a writing for Twitter class and a writing for Instagram, you know, all of the.
Writing for Twitter class would be fun, because then you would have to, every assignment would just be like 280 characters.
Yeah, or threads or moments.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, very, very much. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I really, really appreciate this. It's so great to see you both and see your success. And I know the students, you know, very much enjoyed it. And thank you for everything that you do for our industry and also just for our students. Is there anything else you want to add real quick before we go?
I just want to say that if you guys want to follow me on Twitter and be my friend, come on over. I tweet about Insider a lot. So, and if you have any questions or anything, like feel free to reach out to me. I know that when I was in college, I was kind of scared to reach out to the people that were talking at Mass Comm week, because I was like, wow, they're like doing all these big things. And now that I'm on this side, I'm like, man, I wish I had reached out to people when I was in college. So I think that's what I want to say to all of you. So reach out to me. I'm nice, I promise.
Yeah, same. You can follow me on Twitter at MyraLG. Follow NY Times Arts if you want some not hard news. We have fun on there too. And yeah, you know, feel free to reach out. I will admit having a 2-year-old slows me down a little bit, so just bear with me if you get in touch.
That's awesome. Thank you both. I did just put your Twitter accounts in the chat. So
no, don't follow the one that John just put in. That's my old account. Don't do that one. That's the one I made for your class.
Oh gosh. Okay.
I need to delete that actually.
Never mind. All right.
Virtually VIVI. That's the one. I put it on there too.
Oh, good. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll delete that comment. All right. Well, thank you all both again. Good to see y'all. Thank you again. Thank you. And happy Mass Comm week, everybody else. Have a great week, and we'll see you online.